Situated here.
Get in position.
We're going to be talking about, you can see I combined part 3 and part 4. So we've got a long lesson. Thank you, Paul. You got through the prayer request quick, and David. I told them I had a long lesson, so that's why they tried to hurry so we can cover everything today. Well, we're going to talk about in part 3 Israel's mistakes. Now, we just finished the 6-day war. We studied about that. And we say, well, great, boy, they did good. Yeah, they did. But they made a lot of mistakes, and we're going to talk about some of those. Israel's mistakes. We spent a lot of time studying about Israel's 6-day war in June 1967, so let's look one more time at the land Israel won back in the 6-day war. Israel won back the Sinai Peninsula. They won back the Gaza Strip. They won the West Bank. They won back East Jerusalem. And they won back the Golan Heights. Come in.
Morning.
We're glad to have you join us. What is your name?
Gerald Turner.
Somebody say I didn't hear it.
Turner. Yeah, I come here last Sunday.
Okay. All right. So this is what they won back. And you think, whoa, isn't that great?
Yeah.
Well, Israel political leaders had no desire then to carry the fight into the Arab countries. They didn't want to, they just wanted to get this land back. They didn't go into Syria, Lebanon, or Egypt, or Jordan. They didn't want to do that. They didn't want to go fight them. They're just protecting, and they won back the land that was theirs years ago. Now we're going to look at how Israel handled all the new land that it gained back in 1967. In my opinion, this is my opinion, Israel made a lot of mistakes by not occupying this land and holding on to it. Israel took back East Jerusalem during the 6-day war, but they failed to remove the inhabitants that were living there, and they failed to immediately occupy it with Israeli families or troops. So you won it back, and now they didn't do anything, so it's not theirs. They didn't occupy it. Could this be a mistake by Israel? I believe it is. Come in, Elizabeth. Good to see you.
I'm sorry.
No problem. You think that's a mistake by Israel? So what do they have in East Jerusalem? They have the West Wall. The other side over there, the Muslims have it. They won it back in the war, but they didn't hold on to it. So now it was a mistake. Israel also failed to occupy the West Bank. They left no military presence in the West Bank. They won it in the 6-day war. They won out. And now it's a problem area again. Could this be another mistake by Israel? I think so. Israel also failed to leave troops in the Gaza Strip to keep it under Israeli rule. We know this was a big mistake by Israel, because what's going on over there today. They won it, but they made a mistake. They didn't occupy it. They could have left troops in there. They didn't. So now it's a problem. In 1982, Israel made a deal with Egypt, and they gave the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt, and Egypt agreed to never attack Israel. We're going to cover that again later on. So they gave the Sinai Peninsula. You think, well, it's all desert, who cares? Well, the Suez Canal makes a difference. So we'll talk about it later in this presentation. This was probably a good deal to have the peace treaty with Egypt. But what it did do for Egypt, it gave them a way to get into the Gaza Strip. See it on the map? How did the military supplies coming from Iran and these countries, how did they get in there? Well, the only borders around there is Israel, and they're not going to let you in, and the Mediterranean Sea. It has to go up through Egypt. If we had not given the Sinai Peninsula back, they couldn't get their military supplies in there at all. They come up through Egypt. So it turned out like a good deal. We don't need that land, and now then you want to attack us. But on the other hand, look what it opened up. Israel did take control of the western edge of the Golan Heights. This was a strategic piece of property for military purposes. Very important. So here's the situation. Israel feels that the land that they conquered during the Six-Day War belongs to them. Before the Six-Day War, Israel did not possess the Golan Heights, the West Bank, eastern half of Jerusalem, or the Sinai Peninsula. Today's terminology, and you hear this in the news sometimes, is the pre-1967 borders of Israel and the post-1967 borders of Israel. Before the war and after the war. And that's the titles they use on there. I'll show you in a minute when I quote it. Okay, in pre-1967, that means before the Six-Day War, it's the map that you see on the left. And now then, if you look at the one on the right, after the 67 war, that was the land they would have that they conquered, that they say that's what should be theirs. And later they gave the Sinai Peninsula. But they conquered all that. So when you hear the terms, or you read in the paper about the post-67 borders or the pre-67 borders, there's arguments today about these borders. I'll show you. Immediately following the Six-Day War, all the Arabic nations and several other nations demanded that Israel give back the invaded lands and return to the pre-67 borders. All these nations thought, oh, that's not right. Yet, some nations believe that Israel should keep this land and stay with the post-67 borders. Lyndon Johnson was President of the United States in 1967. What was his position on the pre or post borders? Did he believe that Israel was entitled to this land, or did he think Israel should give this land back? He was the president in 1967. President Lyndon B. Johnson did not agree with the idea that Israel should give the land back and return to those borders. That was at 1967. So what did other succeeding U.S. presidents think about the pre- and post-67 borders? Two other presidents did not think that in favor of the idea that you should give this land back. Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan said, no, you don't give that land back. You conquered it, it's yours. 5 United States presidents believed that Israel should give this land back and go back to the pre-67 borders. Jimmy Carter believed it. George H. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama, they all felt that, yeah, you should go back to that and give this land back that you conquered. Interesting. By the way, President Gerald Ford, he took a neutral position saying, let them work it out. That's not a bad position. That's not a bad position, is it? I like it. You may be wondering where President Trump stood concerning these pre-67 borders. During his presidency, Donald Trump took a strong pro-Israel stance. He did not agree that Israel should return to the pre-67 borders. And what was President Joe Biden's position? Actually, it was hard to get a complete answer from Biden. While he supports Israel, he also believes the Palestinians deserve their own land and it should be provided by Israel. So he didn't really take a stance, but that's the thing. Palestinians want their own land, and some think Israel should give it to it. Well, why doesn't Iran give them some then? Why doesn't Iraq? Why doesn't Saudi Arabia? Some of the other countries, Syria. Israel today and its neighbors. Okay, now we're bringing us all the way up kind of to today on some things. We have neighbors. We have Syria, borders it, Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt. Now you can see that Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Turkey, Iran, all surrounded, but they don't go up against the borders. 4 countries that touch the borders of Israel. Syria. Bashar al-Assad. He was like a dictator over there. About a month or two ago, I don't know if you heard about the Syrian rebels, but they took over, and al-Assad now is in Russia with Putin. He left the country. So they have no leader right now in Syria. The rebels, in this case, you always think the rebels are the bad ones. They turn out to be the good ones, because they found out in Syria, they found all these mass graves and torture chambers and all that in Syria, mainly around Damascus. And this guy was responsible, and his dad did the same thing. His dad was Hafez al-Assad, and they were training Bashar's brother to be the military leader to replace Hafez. And he got killed in a car wreck. Bashar was in England studying medicine. He was going to be a doctor. So they had to bring him back and made him the leader over there. There was no elections. It's just hand down in the family. So right now we have no leader in Syria over there. Now the only place that Syria borders Israel is at the Golan Heights. It's a small amount, but was the leader. Now let's talk about Lebanon. In Lebanon, Michael Aoun, he was the president. In 2022, his term ran out, and they haven't re-elected a president. But they have 3 leaders. The president has to be a Christian in Lebanon. Interesting. He has to be a Christian. That's in their constitution. But they have a prime minister and the head of the parliament. And that's a Sunni Muslim and a Shiite Muslim. So they have a 3-prong. You say, well, yeah, we got a Christian president in Lebanon. Yeah, but you're outnumbered 2-1. But they do not persecute Christians in Lebanon. So that's not bad there. But so now then his term ran out in 2022, and for whatever reason, they haven't done any elections yet. Yeah, 2 Muslims are now running the country. Jordan, King Abdullah II. His father was King Abdullah Sr. Trying to find the right word to say for out of him. He's like a nobody. He don't care anything. I mean, he's been in office since 1999, but he doesn't want to fight. He doesn't want to be in these wars or anything. He just like, leave me alone, and that thing. The West Bank belonged to Jordan, but he didn't want to do anything with it. He just, no, I don't want it. He's a nobody. Egypt. The current leader there now, he's been there since 2014, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. El-Sisi. If you say el-Sisi, he kill you.
That's what I do.
Don't say that. Interesting how he became in office. He was the general in charge of all the armies in Egypt. And they had a leader there, Hansi Mubarak, and they found out that he was taking all the money coming in, and the United States sends Egypt $1.3 billion every year. And he was taking that money, instead of it reaching the people and all that, he was giving 2/3 of it to the Muslim Brotherhood, and he was keeping 1/3 for his family. That's where the money was going that we were sending over there. So they found that out, and they kicked him out, put him in prison, and while he was waiting for trial, he actually died in prison. So the one that replaced him his name was Mohammed Morsi. And he said, I promise if you elect me, I won't give any money to the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, he got in office, and guess what? He did that. But between those two, they took the general El-Sisi, I got to make sure I don't say it wrong, El-Sisi, and they put him in charge between the two elections. So then you got the second one voted in. Well, he did the same thing. He was giving money to the Brotherhood, Muslim Brotherhood, and so they kicked him out, and they finally said, well, you know, this general did a pretty good job. Would you run for the president? He said, okay. And it was unanimous, and he won. He's been there since 2014. Don't know really what kind of leader he is. Kind of good, kind of bad. Not too much about him over there, but that's in Egypt. Now we need to take a good look at the Golan Heights and what's the situation there. Have y'all heard about the Golan Heights and always fighting going on up there? You see where it is in there. This is a very strategic piece of land that Israel must not give up. We've talked about this before. It's almost a mile high. It's 1.5 or 1.6 high. And so if you're up there, you're looking down on Israel, and so you put your military up there and look down on Israel, and you can wipe out the northern part of Israel. So Israel needs that land for protection over there. And you see that it touches a little bit of Lebanon, it touches a little bit of Jordan, it touches Syria, and that's Syria's only border to Egypt right there. I mean, to Israel. Israel took command of the Golan Heights in the 6-Day War in 67. Since then, there have been numerous attacks by the Syrians. They didn't stop. So in 1973, with help from the United Nations Peace Corps peacekeeping force, the Syrians and the Israelis agreed to a neutral strip of land between the two, known as the Demilitarized Zone, or the DMZ. You see the little purple line up there? That purple area, that's the DMZ. That's no man's land. Syria's not supposed to come into it. Israel's not supposed to come into it. Take a better look at it. You can see it a little better here. It's that purple area. The DMZ, it's about 3.5 miles at its widest point. It's 600 feet at its narrowest. And it's controlled by the UN peacekeeping forces. And they have people in there and trying to keep it separated, keep it neutral. Major events in hit. A lot of things happen, so we'll hit a few things. We'll just take a look at a few major events that will bring us up to October 2023, the Hamas attack on Israel. In 73, there was the Yom Kippur War. You might know what Yom Kippur is.
Jewish New Year's, isn't it?
What?
Jewish New Year's.
It's the Jewish, but it's not the New Year's. It's their, we call it the Day of Atonement. What do we know about their Day of Atonement? That's when they break 2 goats, and I've read now that there have to be twin goats, and they bring them in, and the priest selects one of the 2. They started this way back when we had the tabernacle, and he takes the one goat, and then he cuts him and bleeds him, and he sprinkles a little bit on the Ark of the Covenant, God's holy place, and then he takes the bowl and he puts his hands in the blood and he wipes it on the second one. The second one. Then he tie a ribbon or a red band of some type of material on it, and they take it way out and they let it go. And all the people are praying that this God, every year we do this, God forgive me of all my sins, take all my sins on this goat and let it go out there and go away and let me start free with no sins today. What did they call that goat?
Scapegoat.
Scapegoat. That's where that word came from. Scapegoat. Scapegoat. Do they do that today? They don't have an Ark of the Covenant. They're not doing sacrifices. But they still do this, and they do it today, and they do it by fasting. I hope I've not got it all written down. I'm getting ahead of myself. This war in 73 came up, and they picked this day, this holy day, that Syria and Egypt decided to attack in 1973. This is only, what, 7 days after the 6-Day War, with 1967, now we're up to 73. And you think, well, the 6-Day War, everything's over, and 6 years later, here they come back. And these two countries are going to attack, but they're going to attack on this holy day. So how is it celebrated at that time, since there was no temple, there was no Ark of the Covenant? They go to the synagogues, and that's their many churches, and they fast from sundown one night till sundown the next. That's a full day for them. It starts when the sun goes down, the day starts. No food, no drink, no sex, no pleasures, all that. I mean, and the purpose of it is that when they're hungry, when they're thirsty, when they're missing out on pleasures, that their mind then turns to God. That's why I'm doing this. That's their Day of Atonement. That's their Yom Kippur now. That's how they do it, because they don't do the sacrifices right now over there. So Egypt and Syria chose that day to go back and attack Israel again. Israel mobilized its forces and launched a counterattack, eventually pushing the Arab forces back. A ceasefire was brokered by the United Nations on October 25th in 73. We know why Syria wanted to control the Golan Heights. Military reasons. They wanted that. Why did Egypt want the desert of the Sinai Peninsula? Does that sound like, who wants that desert? Egypt wanted to control both sides of the Suez Canal. So they already had one side of the Suez Canal. They wanted to have control of the other side. That's why they wanted the Sinai Peninsula. They didn't want all that desert stuff up there, but that's why they wanted it. As it stood, Egypt did not get across. This is in 73, remember. They don't give the land back to them until 82. So 73, it's still Israel's, the Sinai Peninsula. As it stood, Egypt still controlled the east bank of the Suez Canal, and Israel controlled the west bank of the Suez Canal. In 1979, Israel and Egypt had a peace treaty. Israel agreed to withdraw its armed forces and its civilians from the Sinai Peninsula. So they started in 1979 with this withdrawal. Egypt agreed to leave the Sinai Peninsula demilitarized. In other words, no fighting at all in there. The treaty provided for free passage for Israeli ships through the Suez Canal and recognized the Strait of Tiran or the Gulf of Aqaba as international waterways. There's a lot of concern about who's going to control the waterways. So I started in 79, vacating the Sinai Peninsula, Israel did, and then in 82, Israel gave the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt. This was a continuation of the peace treaty of 79. Israel had withdrawn all of its troops from the Sinai. This was a major sacrifice for Israel, but a step needed to bring normalization of diplomatic, economic, and cultural relations between two countries. They knew when they gave that back, Israel no longer bordered the Suez Canal. They lost both sides, they don't have it. But Egypt promised to keep it free in there, if you can trust Egypt to do that. Don't know if that was a good deal or not. From 1982, bringing us up to 2023, during this time, many efforts were made to finalize peace treaties between Israel's bordering countries and the Arab nations. Some were approved, but little results as neighboring countries continued military skirmishes. There was a few little peace treaties made, but they didn't last during that time. And ends part 3, where we were. I want to get into part 4, Israel today. And we're going to start with October the 7th, 2023. Hamas attacks Israel. 1,200 dead, 240 hostages taken. Sometimes you read 240, sometimes you read 250. Depends on where you read. And the most used has been the 240. You may have thought that this attack took place only in one location. Did y'all think that? Heard any different? Did it take place in one location?
Not sure.
It did not. I did. I just assumed they went in and killed 1,200 people and took 240 hostages and came back. I never read till I started putting this together. I'll show you. Look at this key up here at the top on the left. The red are the locations where the Hamas fighters came into Israel. The green is the crossing point. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 places that Hamas crossed into Israel. Hamas attacked over 20 different communities in southern Israel. The coordinated assault involved various methods, including rockets, motorized paragliders, and ground assaults, leading to over 1,200 deaths. On October 7, 2023, the red circles represent where it's believed that most of the hostages were taken, in these sections right here. I never thought, I just thought it was one location. The green circles, yes, some of the hostages were actually citizens living inside of Gaza or visiting Gaza at the time. Some of the hostages were already in Gaza that they took. The attack marked the deadliest day for Israel since its independence, and it led to significant escalation in the Israel-Hamas conflict in Gaza. See, if they were just, when they conquered that in 1967, if they would just put soldiers in there and contained that land, they could have kept Hamas out. The Palestinians that are living in there weren't the basic problems. Probably 90% of the Palestinians, they were okay. It might be 10%, I read somewhere, and that's not that many of them that they favored Hamas. But what they suffer the most. I mean, they're just people. In response, Israel declared a state of war, and he launched a large-scale offensive against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Notice the wording. It's against Hamas. It's not against the Palestinians. This is important. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that the victory in Gaza will not be complete until Hamas is completely wiped out and the southern border is completely closed. Remember when they gave the Gaza Strip back to Egypt? That's the only border that they can get their military supplies. So he has two things. We're not going to go halfway through there and then stop the war. Hamas has to be completely wiped out. The border has to be sealed so they can't get back in. And so that's why he won't stop. That's his program. He won't stop until these two things are met. Lebanon, right after Israel started firing rockets into Gaza, Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon began firing rockets and escalating fighting between Israel and Lebanon. So Hezbollah is like a Hamas, but they come from Syria. Hamas comes from Iran. They're just rebel fighters. Now, Lebanon doesn't want to be in a battle. They're kind of like Jordan. They don't want to be in the fight. They don't want to be in this. But when you get Hezbollah up there, well, that's the same as having Hamas down in Gaza. Syria. Now that Bashar al-Assad has been ousted as Syria's leader, the Syrian rebels have increased fighting in the Golan Heights. You know, it's hard to weigh Syrian rebels, good or bad. I mean, they got out a bad dictator that was torturing people, mass graves, I mean, awful stuff. And they got rid of him, which is a good thing. Now they're trying to continue the battle. They want to handle the Golan Heights. They want to occupy that. Well, I understand why they want to do it, I guess. In response, Israel fighters we're talking about today, they pushed past the DMZ and now they're into Syria, so they crossed that DMZ. This has brought harsh words from the United Nations, but they're just trying to protect rather than have Syrian rebels come across the DMZ and wipe them out on the edge. That's what's going on today. And in the West Bank, there's a lot going on here. You'll read a lot about it in the papers. Prior to the 6-Day War, the West Bank belonged to Jordan. Israel didn't take control of the West Bank after the 1967 war, so it remained Jordan's. In 1988, King Abdullah II, he renounced its claim to the West Bank. I don't want it. Told you he's a wimp. Looking for that word earlier, couldn't think of it. He's a wimp. Not much of a leader, but they re-elect him. Well, they don't elect him. It's handed down by the family. So the West Bank has got a lot going on over there today. During this time, the Palestinians began living there after Jordan said they didn't want it, and they claimed it as their territory. Well, now Israel not wanting the Palestinians to have this land, they started building condos for Jewish families. So the fighting is still going on the West Bank. So the Palestinians, people with no land, they went in there in the West Bank and they started building their homes and everything. Well, Israel decided, well, no, that's our land. We want it in 6-Day War. So they send people in there and they're building. I think they call them condos that they're building, but they also, the Jewish people call them kibbutz. You ever heard that word, kibbutz? It's a group of homes together, and it's like family. And they're in little groups and all the families. So now we have, what we got it going is a battle of building homes in the West Bank. Let me show you. This color right here is the Palestinian settlements. That's where they pretty much settled in those areas, and they got homes and buildings and retail little shops and stuff, and and they've got their little communities in there. Israel's trying to hold on and keep control of the West Bank by building more communities for Israeli families to occupy. So that's a funny battle. No ammunition. The Palestinian population in the West Bank, this is in 2017's latest we could get, it was 620,000 at the end of 2017. Israel had over 100 settlements in the West Bank with a population of 210,000. So you see who's numbering one, who's got the most in there. That battle is still going on today. There's not fighting. They're just trying to get in there and build, and that's what they're doing. So you read something in the paper or on the news about it, you kind of understand what's happening over there. Now, on November 2023, peace talks began in Qatar. Now, look how small that country is. Look at that on that map. Little bitty thing way down there. It's small but very rich country due to gas and oil production. So that's where they're having peace talks, and Egypt has a big role in it. The United States has a role in it. So several countries are down there trying to make peace treaties of this Gaza and Israel battle going on. Not Gaza, Hamas and Israel, really. On January 19th, 2025, we're getting up close now. I'm going faster than I thought I would, so I get out early. Israel and Hamas reached an agreement on a 6-week ceasefire. This was January this year. This ceasefire agreement is not a peace treaty. It's not a peace treaty. Not all members of the Israeli parliament are pleased with it. It's really a ceasefire agreement. And it's only for 6 weeks. So what's the terms in there? There's 5 parts to the terms of this ceasefire. They're going to do 6 weeks, and then they're still meeting down in Qatar and trying to do something for the next 6 weeks. What do we do? And then the next 6 weeks, and see if they can finally reach a peace treaty. Number 1, hostage release. Hamas will release 33 Israeli hostages, including women, children, and other people, in exchange for Israel release 30 Palestinians. There's 5 parts. That's the first part. Yeah, that sounds like a swap for me. That's why some of the Israeli parliament didn't like it. Prisoner exchange. Number 2, Israel will release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, including women, children, and elderly people. 3, Israeli troop withdrawal. Israeli forces will pull back to a buffer zone about 1 kilometer wide inside Gaza. This will allow displaced Palestinians to return to the home. They opened up a space so some of them can start coming in now. That's part of this agreement in there. They didn't remove the troops. They just backed them up and opened up a space. 4, humanitarian aid. Said it will flow into Gaza to help rebuild and support the population. That's what that opening was for, just so they could get these trucks in there to try to help the people. 5, future negotiations. The ceasefire will last for 42 days. How long is that? 6 weeks. During which further negotiations will take place to address long-term issues. Okay? So they're still working on it. This is only for 6 weeks. Now, prior to this ceasefire, prior to the treaty, at least 117 hostages had already been released, currently in exchange for Palestinian prisoners by Israel. The Israeli government believed that at least 98 hostages remained in Hamas captivity, although the figure may include the remains of dozens who died or were killed during the conflict. In the first phase of the deal, Hamas is expected to release 33 hostages over this 6-week period. Israel says it will release 1,900 Palestinians from Israel prisons as part of this. Does that look like a fair deal?
It's not a very fair
Remember I
trade.
said, we read earlier, we said that not all of the Israeli parliament members agreed with this. What it does tell you, Israel had a lot of prisoners. A lot of prisoners. Hamas had 240 hostages. So they're trying to work it out. I guess they want to end up at 0 on both sides. So how's the ceasefire going? First of all, the ceasefire was only between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. That's all. There are still skirmishes between the Hezbollah in Lebanon. Remember we said the Hezbollah come over from Syria and they're over there. Well, those skirmishes are still going on up there. Not real heavy, but they are. The Syrian rebels on the Golan Heights, and they're still doing that. They're still fighting up there, so you'll read some fighting up there. So this ceasefire was only Hamas and Israel. It was not in Lebanon. It was not on the Golan Heights. And the Palestinians are still trying to hold on to the West Bank, and Israel's still trying to go in there and move. So make kind of sense what's going on over there today. January the 19th, Hamas releases 3 female hostages this year. In exchange for the release of these 3 Israeli hostages, Israel released 90 Palestinian prisoners. We had said something earlier about one 1 in 30, so that would be right. Reported on January the 24th, more than 3,800 trucks carrying fuel and aid began entering Gaza, but organized gangs were stealing much of the aid, hijacking the trucks, and beating and kidnapping Palestinian drivers. That was just January 24th. They reported that. Isn't that awful? You know, we think about the Palestinians, you got to feel bad for them. There's some Palestinians that are not good, but there's the majority they're just people. They lived in some vacant land that was vacant for 2,000 years, and then Israel comes back, and now all of a sudden it's their land, and now the Palestinians are looking for other places to live, and you got to have some sympathy. But some of the Hamas militants are Palestinians. We don't know what percent, how much, but you got to feel sorry for these. January 24th, Hamas releases 4 more hostages. Look at my little total down at the bottom down there. In exchange for the freedom, Hamas released 200 Palestinians, 4 for 20. Hamas freed on January the 30th 8 more hostages, and Israel gave up 110 Palestinian detainees and prisoners during the latest exchange in the ongoing ceasefire. We don't think we have all of the numbers exactly right on the number of prisoners that Israel's releasing. We have the numbers pretty clear on what Hamas is giving us, but they kind of round off the numbers sometimes to 100 or 200, and we don't really know for sure. So I kind of put a running total down there. So they released 12, Israel released 310. That, however, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delayed the release of the 110. This was on January 30th, after calling the hostage handovers horrific. They were all meshed in, they were celebrating, all Hamas people had guns, and he couldn't hardly get his Israeli people in there to get to the hostages. They were making a big show of it and stuff, and he told them, no, I'm not releasing because of the way you're releasing these prisoners. He later okayed them, saying he had received assurances about future exchanges not being this way. I mean, you can see in there the crowd. I found that photo of it. The crowd and all around there, they make it a big issue. Couldn't hardly get the Israeli people in there to get the hostages out of there. So he did the right thing. He says, well, I'm going to hold up on these 110 Palestinians till you give me assurance that we're not going to have this kind of stuff going on again. I thought, well, that's pretty smart of him. February 1, Hamas released 3 more hostages today. In return, Israel will be releasing 90 Palestinians. 400. February the 4th, Benjamin Netanyahu meets with President Trump in the White House. In President Trump's comments, he stated that the United States should take ownership of Gaza with the help of other countries, level it, rebuild it. He showed sympathy for the Palestinians and their families. How's that going over?
Not well.
But what I didn't put in there, and I should, that proposal says we take all the Palestinians out while we clean up the land and then come back in. If you're a Palestinian, what are you thinking?
We'll never get it back.
Well, you'll never let me back in. No, I'm not leaving. Yeah. So a general idea may be not too bad, but overall, no, if I was a Palestinian, I'm not leaving. No. And if he wants to make the deal right, he could say all the Palestinians in the north go south. and then you clean up Gaza on the north, and when you get them cleaned up, all the Palestinians go up there, and then you clean up the south. I think they could buy into that, but to leave that country with a fear I'll never get back in, I could understand that.
But they don't have any water or nothing there, so
Hey, what?
they don't have no water or electricity or nothing in there.
Well, that's why Trump's saying we need to go in there and level it and rebuild